Good evening and welcome to Chasing the Facts. I'm Sam Chase, your host, and with us this evening is Mr. Badhri Uppiliappan, who is the chairman of Chelmsford's Clean Energy and Sustainability Committee. Welcome, Badhri.
Thank you.
Very glad to have you on the show, and we're hoping you're going to give us a good summary of our clean energy and sustainability efforts as a town. But before we get into that, we ask our first-time guests to just give us a brief biographical sketch, and then after we've done that, we'll get into the general discussion.
Absolutely. I've been a resident in town since about the summer of 2005, so about 18 years and change. I became a town meeting rep 2016 onwards, so about 7.5 or whatever the math comes out to be in that particular way that I've been a town meeting rep now for Precinct 11. I started off with in town as volunteer effort with the Greener Chelmsford Initiative as their first volunteer to recognize commercial businesses trying to move into the space of or doing green practices essentially, and recognizing by the amount of work they do.
Now, was that a formal committee assignment?
It was actually it was a formal select board assignment.
Okay.
It was a single person, not a committee. It was just a one-person army, so to speak, at that time, just to get things kicked off and going, I think, at that particular point. And so that's where it started off as a journey, and then I volunteered with the Energy Conservation Committee that the town put together. And then I took a little hiatus in 2010-11 time frame to complete my second master's degree, and then move on to continue to the work life that continued to work there. And back in about the 2020 time frame, as Massachusetts began its efforts in the second round of what needed to happen with the climate bills coming in, and our adoption of a town meeting in 2021, the recognition that we needed to reach net zero, establishment of a committee, I began my efforts with Clean Energy and Sustainability Committee in the fall of 21, essentially. So that's where that is.
And in your professional life, you are an electrical engineer.
Yes, I'm an electrical engineer, and obviously it contains different variations. I've worked at a Wilmington-based company here in Massachusetts and Analog Devices, and I moved to work with, last year, to work with BAE Systems up in New Hampshire. So that's what I do now.
Very good. Well, you certainly have very good credentials for, I think, the assignments that you've been given, which are somewhat technical in nature and involve that kind of research and understanding and so forth. So I think that's probably a good fit. Why don't you, if you can, take us back about 10 years when Chelmsford really started in earnest to embrace the Green Communities Act, I think it was.
Yep.
It was an actual act of the legislature.
Yep.
And then so we'll start then. Maybe you can take us back to then and bring us up to where we are now.
Absolutely. I'll start a little bit before. Back in about 2008, I think Massachusetts made into law what's known as the Global Warming Solutions Act, which was the base act that allowed us to mandate that we would reach about a 25% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions relative to the 1990 emissions standards that was established back then.
And
as
that
the reference.
primarily was CO2 focused?
It was just greenhouse gas overall. It's global warming. It's not just CO2. CO2 is a metric of what we use, in a particular manner. But it was just an overall mechanism of reduction of greenhouse gases, essentially, or what was being put out in as a metric of equivalence of carbon dioxide equivalents. Then the Green Communities was formulated as a way to get municipalities into action, and Chelmsford was one of the first 20, 25 towns, give or take, and adopted that as of January 1st, 2011, if I'm not mistaken.
And that was by act of town meeting?
By act of town meeting, we voted on that, and we got involved in that, obviously, after that. And The town's benefited a lot from that over the last 10, 12 years. If you look at it, we have gotten grants of upwards of $1.3 million over the last 10 to 12 years that have supported the energy efficiency and other related upgrades that have happened within town, be it the high school, the senior center, the police department, the middle schools, the elementary schools. We also have put lots of solar panels up top everywhere on all of those things, all of those buildings, and also to begin towards more energy efficient town operational vehicles in different departments as is feasible, right? Not a, hey, I'll just go buy a battery operated Hummer or something. But
I'd like to see that.
but we've been doing the right investments under the town management that Paul Cohen has led. And
Well, we have a lot of older buildings, which are certainly when they were designed and built, the energy efficiency was not even a consideration.
Absolutely.
And so I think there's been a lot of opportunity, and I notice over the last 15 or so years, as a result of some of these initiatives, that we have focused on that, and that's a good thing. Regardless of, you know, the climate change or global warming situation notwithstanding, that in and of itself is a good idea, just to achieve the efficiencies.
Exactly. Efficiency being the key word in our system, being a good thing to do.
Right.
And if you keep efficiency core and center, I think a lot of options will suddenly look up and say, okay. And it's also a question of appropriate valuation, right? And you, as FinCom, you know that, or assessors, you know how to value different things.
Correct.
And that's an important piece to guide policy decisions and move forward. A couple of other points I think the Chelmsford also did that I want to recap for our audience and town residents is that back in 2013, 14, as part of the green, not just the green communities, but the global warming, Solutions Act and other initiatives we took, we did have a solarized Chelmsford-Carlisle joint project that yielded, bulk buying or group buying opportunities to install solar panels through a bid process. And the town of Chelmsford also conducted its first Mass Save campaign back then in 2016-17 to get residents ready for it. I'll hyperlink now to the fact that we are currently, as Clean Energy and Sustainability Committee, we have begun this fall a campaign to get as many residential homes audited this couple of years coming up under the Mass Save aegis through a community grant.
And folks, there is no reason not to do it, because first of all, it costs nothing.
Absolutely.
I had it done 4 years ago, and I got about $800 worth of light bulbs, which I was not charged for. And I noticed, and just on the light bulbs, I noticed my electric bill dropped by about $12 a month. So that's a substantial saving.
Absolutely.
Okay? And kind of a funny story, the guy came in, and of course he was very, very thorough, and he wanted to go up into my attic and look at my insulation, and I said, you don't have to do that. And he said, why not? And I said, because I've got more insulation up there than you could ever imagine. And he said, why? I said, well, because 20 years ago I installed hot air heat. And I have the ducts going through basically what's an unheated crawl space.
Yep.
And the contractor only gave me about 2 inches of wrap on the and it was just totally insufficient. And I spent 3 weekends up there, and I insulated beyond what you would believe.
Absolutely.
And he looked and he said, he said, I give you an A+ for this one. I said, okay, well, once in a while I do something right, But no, seriously, that people really need to do that.
Yes.
Because they will benefit. It'll help the overall program as you've described, but they will actually save money if they adopt the recommendations that Mass Saves gives them.
Yes. One anecdote or another stress point that I want to highlight here for our audience is that historically, we have only averaged 300 to 400 homes of audits, give or take, under a program. It's an anecdotal evidence or data point, but somewhere in that range when people conduct on an annual basis. As part of committee discussions, we want to get up to 2,000 this time around to make sure there are 2,000 homes audited.
We have over 10,000 single-family residences in
but
town.
at least 2,000
Right.
in a year and a half span, if possible, and really get them moving along, so that we, as we know from the winters past and summers past of variations, but at least the winters past, we want to make sure energy efficiency is a key theme that drives everybody's decision making or the ability to save more upfront. So just leaving that as a anecdote or
No, I think that's
point
a
in
very,
there.
very good point. And it's permeated the construction industry. I had a new roof put on last year, and I was absolutely amazed at the differences between that effort and what I had done 20 years earlier in terms of the technology that they employed and the method. Now, it's a lot more expensive.
Absolutely.
But you get a much better product. I've got 50-year shingles, okay? I'm 76, do the math. That's the last roof I'm ever going to have to do. But the way they did the venting and everything for the it's phenomenal. Very, very, very fascinating if you watch the process. So, you know, this whole idea of trying to be more efficient in terms of energy usage and so forth has really permeated the culture, and I think it's a good thing.
Absolutely.
It's a very good thing. So, thank you for that bit of background. I guess I was aware of some of these efforts, but I really didn't become aware of the efforts of your committee until a couple of years ago. I'm an assessor in town. I think my audience knows that. And I got a call from Dave Sperry, who's on your committee, and he called and he said, you guys have records on heating systems in buildings in town. And I said, yes, we do. It's on the field card. And he said, well, can I take a look at that? And I said, well, it's public information. I said, but can I ask you what you're doing? And so I got the explanation. And the idea was initially to see, to catalog the buildings in town by usage of heating system.
Right.
Okay, so I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to let you continue that thought, and you can say what the committee has done, maybe give us some stats as to who's using what to heat by and what the ultimate goal is there.
Absolutely. So I'll give you more of the framework discussion and the background first as the
Good.
That will set the stage of why. And Dave is also an engineer.
Yes, I know he is.
Therefore, we are all very data-oriented, not just hand-wavy personality. The committee wanted to, first of all, establish what our greenhouse gas emissions were as a whole of a town, and just get a handle between municipal operations, between residential, between commercial.
Excluding transportation.
Excluding transportation.
Just residential and commercial
buildings, municipal buildings, and an estimate based on transportation, just an estimate based on general statistical data that you can accrue for. So we did that, and based on fuel usages and electricity usage, all the other put together, Dave helped really put that with frameworks that were available in the domain from the state. We averaged at about 10 metric tons per person per year in Chelmsford.
How does that compare with other communities?
It's about statistically the same. The global model for the United States states that we are at about 16 tons per person per year. That includes food, clothing, travel, air travel specifically, and other likes. That the average is about 16. Of course, the utopian goal that we have to reach is under 0.5. So it's a long ways there. So we'll debate that.
I'll never see it, folks.
we'll debate that at a different way. So once we set that understanding of it, what we wanted to understand is the potential of how many homes would be on different fuel types. What are the implications? What are, just to get a color, a broad stroke color of it. Ideally, we would want to know, how far you are from the next potential change out of an equipment. Of course, if there's an emergency, it's an emergency. You can't do that. We would just want to understand, just like a census, we would like to understand the age groups of all of these equipment as opportunities to have broad conversations as saying, is there something more efficient that you could go to, right? And understand that perspective. Obviously, what we determined from that big survey of computation is that residential happens to be about residential buildings or total buildings, residential plus commercial, account for about 60% of the greenhouse gas emissions that we do. So 6 out of every 10 is based on that. And when you look down a little bit down on that, it's mostly for residential, it's mostly heating and cooling that comes out as your key dominant factors. It's not your cooking, drying and stuff, but dominantly it's
The high usage.
elements that really go there between the air conditioning systems or heating systems as the key. So that was the background that we had. What our committee did was to study and understand, just to get an understanding of what the state goals are in different subsectors, building, transportation, energy production as such, and also referenced a framework planning document that was put out by the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission, which is in the core Boston area, region-wise. And they put out 4 pillars, which I ended up showing at town meeting during the recent town warrant article, which is clean energy supply, building emissions, transportation emissions, and using zoning as a policy helper, if possible, right, as is appropriate. So those were identified, and we started putting together some of the pillars. So in essence, you get to hear about the actions that we are trying to do somewhere in these 4 pillars at this point, even though there are other pillars that are not yet sufficiently developed enough for policy level at this point. Those are national or international policy levels at this particular point, which is food and transportation and stuff. Of the air travel and stuff is more not a Chelmsford oriented thing at this particular point. But I'll leave it at that and see if you have other discovery questions.
Well, I do, actually, because I find this discussion fascinating, quite frankly. Now, in terms of the goals that have been set, now there are national goals.
Yeah.
There are state goals, all right. My sense is that the state goals are probably more stringent than the federal goals. Is that an accurate statement?
Approximately.
Yeah.
So Massachusetts, in its after the 2008, we did a 2020 benchmark number that the report came out in mid 2022, early 2022. We exceeded our 25% number, give or take, I think, to 31%. We actually beat that requirement by 31%, so by 6 points, essentially. And what we set up was a 2030 checkpoint in the new climate bill that came out in 2022. That was modeled by the state sufficiently to be economically viable pathway to reach there, was a 45% reduction over the 1990 levels, right? So that's
By 2030.
by 2030.
Okay.
There is an immediate 2025 number also, but I'm not going to go into that necessarily because it's too close.
We're too close to
We are
that,
too
right.
close to it, but back about a year and a half, it was still 3 years, and they thought
Do
some
you
of
think
this.
the 2030 goal is attainable if we stay on current track?
I do not think the state has a lot of conversation going on. In a current track, will not be able to meet our 2030 goals as such. So there is going to be a set of, I think, rejuvenated activity set coming along from the state in the next couple of years. Definitely, I expect it to pick up steam in that way. Is that there will be more focus on the adoption of heat pump technology for cooling and heating. As such, there will be more policy level, I expect, more policies on power supplies, essentially clean energy, to come up as a way in an appropriate cost structure. So I think those are 2 areas that I see fundamentally having some impetus. There's a possibility that I think transportation also gets more impetus there, but I feel that that's a much more personal choice, or even more a personal choice, and it takes time to happen there in some ways, right? I think I can do better with buying the next 30 years of supply, clean energy supply, for the price of a new car in many ways. So those are things I think will be on the horizon, but we are running behind our state goal in any particular manner at this point.
How about other states that have similar programs in place? How do we fare relative to that? Not that it's a contest, but I'm just interested to see.
I'm not going to, I don't have all the numbers out there. There are different states that are similarly mindseted, have different profiles of what they're trying to achieve.
Right.
I think what I would say is Massachusetts, and there is opportunity here, is that Massachusetts, since 2008, has always wanted to be either a national leader or even potentially an international leader. So I think from that perspective, it's an economic driver and also a potential for job creation, leadership and thought leadership, essentially, that creates the environment where businesses and our future is much more viable and are thriving. Right, so that's an important point. So I'll say that that's critical in there. There are sub-segments of certain things that neighboring states like, say, New York or Rhode Island have more aggressive targets and or pivots, or even Maine, for that matter, is picking up heat pump technology like nobody else is game. They're far ahead of us as Massachusetts in heat pump.
Interesting. Yeah.
So it's an interesting observation there on that point. And Rhode Island wants to be on a 100% clean energy supply by 2035, if not 2040. So those are all interesting dynamics that are coming into play in subsegments. But I think overall, it's Massachusetts. We are in a pathway that I think we'll have to redouble efforts in some of these areas and come up with different policy or pushes or campaigns to make people aware and to facilitate economically migrating to new pathways that is efficient.
You've, just in the last couple of minutes when you've been talking about this, you have been very careful to talk about the economics of this change, and I think that's very important, and I think it's good that you recognize that, because I think a lot of them, we'll talk a little bit about just the recent effort that you shepherded through town meeting, was to get our warrant article number 25, which was the adoption of stretch energy code. Can you take just a minute and tell us what that is and how that factors into the overall picture?
Again, as an engineer, I've got to build the base of where things are, the foundation to us. So there are three codes in effect at this point, so to speak. One is the base code, upon which is the stretch code that we adopted as part of the Green Communities Act back in 2010-11. What we adopted a few weeks ago in the fall town article was a specialized energy code. So I'll walk you through the key differences, essentially. The base code itself gets updated every 2 to 3 years, and it's based on the International Energy Conservation Commission's models, basically, or the recommendations, essentially. So every 2 years, that gets updated. The stretch is supposed to be a little bit beyond that. That's the notion of what the stretch is. The specialized code, which was created, was to actually sort of what I would call as bend the future curve a little bit. And that only applies to new construction. And it has nothing different from the building codes other than the fact that all you're doing is to do consumer protection by saying when you have an empty house, empty studs, just make sure that if you use fossil fuels, those appliance points are wired for an electrical equivalent at some point in the future before you close up the walls and insulate your home so that nobody else has to rewire them at a much higher cost, because you know retrofitting something is going to be much more expensive.
It always is.
Right? So that's number one. The additional is if you do choose for convenience to use a fossil fuel-based equipment in the house, it requires you to have, depending on the home size and or the construction type, it requires you to have a minimally sized solar array on the rooftop or on premises, be it ground mounted or on the roof. Roof is available space you could build on
Now,
top of it.
that particular requirement for the solar panels, is it taken into account how the property is situated? And, you know, if you're in a heavily wooded area and you don't get the sunlight, would that still apply or not?
You're allowed exceptions, which
Okay.
is if you have less than 70% of potential solar insolation, not insulation, insolation, S-O-L, the amount of solar
Amount of
energy
sun that's hitting
does
your
come to the
property,
roof,
right.
as if there was no trees or any other buildings
Right.
for that matter. It does allow you to reduce that.
Okay.
You're not required to go cutting down neighbors' trees just so that you can fulfill yours or on your own property lot, other than the ones that you want to do. It's designed in a way that it's applicable across the board because, you know, in many other more city-like structures or downtown-like building areas, you may have other taller buildings that may shade, and therefore it does give you that out.
Right.
In particular. So it's not requiring that thou shall, but
The solar
shall.
requirement to me, again, and this isn't my area, but I do have
Please.
general knowledge of construction. Wiring for an electric dryer, an electric stove, if you're going to put in gas, that's not very expensive at the time you do it, just for those type of
Absolutely.
appliance. But solar would my gut feeling is that's probably a lot more expensive to do, to make ready for solar. Is that a fair
So-
statement? And
Yeah.
if that is true, are there offsets, federal or state programs that would help with some of that?
absolutely. The stretch code and others already require you to have solar-ready roof in the sense of you should build your 2x6, whatever the joists are and the frames or the framing should be able to add extra solar
Right.
weight on top of it, plus the snow loads that's computed. Solar is, at least for the next 10 years, has a federal rebate of about 30%, I think, on the install costs. And you also have state rebates on top of it. You also have mass save rebates if you put appropriate sized batteries and stuff that are grid connected and demand stuff, right? So there are lots of different ways that the actual cost comes down. The typical payback is, depending on usage and where you stand at, could be anywhere between 5 to 7.5 years when you are already in the money, so to speak.
And the panels last at least 20 years anyway, right?
20 years is the
Okay.
minimum guarantees in many places, 25, many of them. Statistical in-field data says that many of them are outlasting that. So, you know, there's obviously the 1C, 2C bad components that fail,
Of
but the
course.
statistical data says that it's 20 plus.
I know all about that as an electrical engineer, so
Yes.
we'll take your word for it, and trust me, folks, I've had the experience. Electronics do fail at times.
Yep.
I have friends that have had solar for years, and they tell me at some point, at whatever that point is, the 7-year period or 8-year, they say, I'm getting free electricity after that point. So if you can do it, it's a good thing to do, obviously.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I was, so you must be very pleased. We've got about a minute to go with the show. This goes very quickly. I just have to say, I thought you did a very, very good presentation at town meeting. I think
Thank you.
you won a whole lot of people over that maybe initially thought, I'm not going to support this article.
Thank you.
So I think you did a very nice job with that, and I think you should be pleased at the work that you've done and your committee. And so in the last 30 or so seconds, is there anything you'd like to say to the audience?
Absolutely. I'd like to say, number one, thanks to my committee members for helping me out with all the details. But we do have a published draft climate action plan, some of the topics that we discussed today on the town website. Go search for that. And it talks about the same elements. We would love your feedback on it. Please do participate in the mass save audits. And when you hear our committee name, just don't get afraid that we are going to come in and take away choices away from you. We are here to, as we discussed, economically and in an equity-based manner. We want to make sure that the transition is just and viable that we can get to. And it's all about, I think, I love the phrase that I copied from a book title, to be a good ancestor. So I'll leave that as the mechanism to say.
Very good. And
Be
we're
a
out
good
of time.
ancestor.
Thank you very much, Badhri.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Good. Well done.